I was just watching television and I sort of glanced over and I thought, oh, there's something there, and looked back again. And then there was this apparition. It was this gorgeous, probably 45, 50-year-old woman. She had kind of, one of these exotic beehive-y type things on top of her head. And she was just sitting there watching TV with me. And I thought, my God, this can't be real. So I shut my eyes. I thought, no, she'll go away. I'm just seeing things. This will go away. And I looked back over and she was still there. And I just turned to her and said, well, I hope you're enjoying the show.
Welcome to the Spirit Sisters podcast. My name is Karina Machado and I'm the author of Spirit Sisters, Women's True Stories of the Paranormal. In this podcast, I'll revisit the women behind my most unforgettable stories and unearth new tales to chill, intrigue, astound and offer hope. You'll hear first-hand accounts of sacred journeys, spirit encounters, near-death experiences, angels, mysteries, marvels, and love more powerful than death. Whatever you believe about the afterlife, I invite you to open your minds and hearts as ordinary people reveal their extraordinary encounters. I acknowledge the Dharawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land of Sutherland Shire in Australia, where I live and record Spirit Sisters, and I recognise their continuing connection to lands, waters and community. I pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. You're listening to Spirit Sisters. I'm your host, Karina Machado. Welcome to our special Halloween episode. I thought it only fitting that I share a haunted house story today. And what makes it extra special is that I had the opportunity to catch up with Nell Jones, whose story features in my book, Where Spirits Dwell. Nell is a retired teacher and a writer who lives in Stockton, a beachside suburb in the New South Wales city of Newcastle. The traditional custodians of these lands and waters are the Awabakal and Worimi Peoples. In 2000, Nell bought a derelict, century-old cottage that had once been a general store. The home signified a fresh start for Nell and her then-teenage daughter Caitlin, but as they would come to discover, they'd have to share their home with a cast of spirit visitors. From a vintage dame in a stylish frock to a smelly coal miner and little girls playing in the backyard, the place was packed with ghosts, as a paranormal investigator would declare. At the height of the haunting, Nell called in the investigator from the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research. His name is Rob Tilley, and there's a chapter about his case files in Where Spirits Dwell. As Nell shares in our conversation, Rob performed a house clearing, but even all these years later, Nell still has a sense that she has company in her home. Enjoy Nell's story about her beloved home, Portal to the Past. Hi, Nell. Welcome to Spirit Sisters.
Hi, Karina. How are you?
I'm very well. And we were just saying before pressing record that it's been about 12 years since we last spoke.
That's right. Yeah, that's a long time ago. I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, does it? But that's over a decade. That's ages ago. Yeah.
It's incredible. Time has just flown by, and I really love the opportunity today to speak with you, Nell, because your story about an amazing little house in Newcastle, New South Wales, is in my book, Where Spirits Dwell. And goodness, a lot of spirits were dwelling in there.
They certainly were.
So tell us about your home and what led you to Newcastle.
Well, I was living in the city. I think I referred to this before. I was living in Sydney. I'd lived there for quite a while and I wanted to buy a house. And so where I sort of grew up in the east of Sydney, I loved all the old terraces. I lived in Surrey Hills. I just loved the atmosphere and I didn't really want to move further out. So I decided to try north, and I kind of heard about Newcastle, and I knew that in 1999 BHP was going to close, and I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to come north, find something nice, a nice old building, because I knew the city was going to reinvent itself. And so I found this. I came over the bridge didn't even know about Stockton, where I'm living, came over the bridge and started driving around this gorgeous peninsula and just went, wow, this is like a beautiful little village, a little town almost on Newcastle Harbour, and catch the ferry across. The days of the vehicular ferry have gone, of course, but you could sort of live in a beautiful, quiet, peaceful place with a river and a beach. And I found this gorgeous old house, this old shop. And it was built, I think about 1910. And it was derelict. It had no hot water. The roof was falling in. The back room was sinking into the back of the sand at the back of the house. But I thought, wow, look, I can afford this, and I can probably over time, just borrow some more money as you get a bit more equity in your house and do it up. And so it's taken me about 15 years. I've been here since bought the place in 2000, and I've been here since 2001. So the house was okay for a few years. It didn't seem, there was always a funny kind of feeling in here. But, growing up in old houses, you kind of had that expectation that there's, creaks and, houses are old and the house heats up when it's hot, and when it's cold, it creaks down. But it became pretty evident after a couple of years that there was definitely lots of other people living here with me. And so it took a while to adjust to that. And, the sightings became, I think I told you before, started to actually see things. It just started to get more and more. And then it wasn't just myself or my daughter, who was only 12 when we moved here. Other people in the family or friends started to feel and see things. And so, all my logic to kind of say, well, look, this can't be happening, was just getting a little bit too obvious to me that there was an energy in this house, and there were lots and lots of different types of energy that perhaps, some of them were angry, I think, some really awful things were happening. But there was also some nice little peaceful things. So I started off by really trying to research the history of the house and to find out what had happened. I mean, my initial thought was, gee, somebody's died here. And, you'd have to expect, I suppose, 100-year-old house, that there could have been somebody that died. But that didn't necessarily mean that their spirit was here. So I guess that led me, after I researched the house and found out, who owned it and the life of it, it became kind of clear in a way that I was living on Worimi land. I'm in a little kind of peninsula that would have had many, many sand dunes. And, through research, found out that, yes, there were people, Aboriginal people, that lived here, and that perhaps, there was some sort of spiritual thing going on. That's what I initially thought,
So now let's just backtrack a little bit. So first of all, tell us, when you first walked into the house, did you have any initial impression about it?
It felt old and abandoned, if that makes sense. There was sort of this feeling. It was like and there were spots where you kind of, you'd walk around and you go, oh, that feels a bit weird. Like there was little cold spots. So I think I wasn't overcome by that. I didn't kind of go, oh, wow, I can't live here. I didn't have that feeling. I have walked into other places during my life and I've gone, oh, I'm not going into that room, there's something bad in there. I did not get that feeling. It kind of grew over time, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned that your home does have quite a colourful history and you said it was a shop. Tell us a little bit more about its history as a building.
Okay, well, the land was sectioned or carved up to be sold in about 1887, I think. And the Fairless family came to live here, and they ran a general store, and they ran that for about 30 years, and then it sort of changed hands a few times, and then it became a vet. And I think it was a vet's for about maybe 20, 25 years. And then it reverted back to being a general store, but it was a very poor general store when I bought it. You could see that it was just sort of, I don't know, it was pretty basic. They probably just sold milk and bread in the end in the 90s, and then it just became a private residence.
Okay.
So there's definitely, there's definitely that feeling of that old family here, and I've got lots of old photographs, which assisted me in restoring the house to how it looked in the 1920s and 30s. So I put a big awning back onto the front of the shop. So it's I'm sure that there's been hundreds of colourful characters, and living next door to a very old pub as well. Next to me, there's a pub. So there's kind of an energy on the corner. My street is halfway up the peninsula from the harbour where you catch the ferry. But up until the 90s, there was a ferry at the end of my street. So there's a little marina, and the ferries would take the workmen across to BHP. So the street actually is it's like a boulevard, Hereford Street. It's got shops on both sides, so you can see the relics of time gone past. This was, people would get off the working ferry, they'd walk up here, grab some things from the general store as they went home. I mean, supermarkets weren't a huge thing in those days, I suppose. And then you had the sort of more main street down by the harbour ferry. Okay. So it's a very historical centre of town, I guess.
So you said that when you first moved in with your daughter, who was 12 at the time, things were quiet for a good couple of years.
Yeah.
Tell us, what was the first sign that there was something unusual happening?
Well, I think the first sign was in the kitchen. We noticed that there was these awful smells in there, like around the stove. And there's a shop and an old cottage attached to the back of the shop, and sort of like a little aisleway or a little space. And every time you walked through the back of the shop into the house, this kind of, I don't know, the hair used to just stand up on the back of my neck, and you'd get this cold feeling and this smell. And so it was like a homeless person's, somebody who hadn't washed for a long time. No, that sounds terrible, but that's what it smelt like. And we started smelling that, and then we noticed just little waves of things. I can't really explain that. And then sort of things started to appear. So I actually saw like this old disheveled man that just appeared he kind of went between the shop and the house, and then he was near my stove. And I thought, oh, this can't be happening. But he looked like a little old miner. And that was really my first solid experience. And, I got scared for a few months, and then I thought, well, look, things were moving, and I'd hear little rattles and little creaks. And so I started talking to him, and I'd say, oh, stop that. Stop making those noises, or stop changing. I don't know, things were moving. That little keys on the back of the door would rattle. Sometimes a door would slam, that would be unexplained. So then I had a funny conversation, because you don't really like to say these things to people because they think you're a bit crazy. So I happened to say to my neighbour one day, oh, have you ever had any funny things going on in your home? And she said, oh, yes, we've got this dirty old miner that comes into our hallway. And then I found out the woman across the road also did. So he was kind of house jumping, which was bizarre to me and sounded so unbelievable, Yeah, that was the first kind of sighting that I went, okay, there's something more here than just an old house creaking.
So now let's jump into that sighting in a little bit more detail. So could you set it up for us? Because this was the first apparition, full body apparition you saw in the home, and you did go on to see more, and we'll talk about it all. But as this was the first one, just set it up for us a bit. So were you in the kitchen popping the kettle on, and then you felt something and turned around and you saw this stranger, this disheveled elderly man? What happened?
Yeah, I was just, I think, making dinner. I mean, it's a good long while ago. I think I was just making dinner or in the kitchen doing things. And of course, I could smell this smell, and I could feel this presence. I could feel something. And this guy just was lurking around my stove. And it was like he was watching what I was doing. I don't know whether he was watching me cooking and he was just there for maybe 10 seconds or more. And then he was gone, and I went, oh, gosh. But then I came back through the back of the house, and I could still feel him. And I knew that then I started to realize that I think he was hiding in this darker area of the house, but he just wanted my attention. He just wanted me to know. He must have realized, because I'd been talking to him and sort of, like a naughty kid, saying, oh, stop that, stop moving that, or, go and have a shower, or whatever it was that I was saying to him. He sort of just wanted to let me know that he was there. And he didn't seem threatening. He had like a really dirty old beard, a dirty old hat. really dark clothes. He looked like he came from the 19th century. I couldn't really tell that much and couldn't see. He was transparent, but not transparent. I think more opaque. So you could see some details, but you couldn't really see his face terribly well because his whole face was all kind of, the hat was over, the beard was there. You could see that he was dirty, and that was the first time. And so he just disappeared back into between the shop and the house. And every time any time I walked past there, I was freaking out because I go, my God, he's in there. Is he going to come out? Or, yeah, he felt like he was going to touch me or something, And we hadn't had any experiences of being touched or had things taken yet. So it was like he was just saying, hey, I'm here. Be aware that I'm here, and this is my space, and you are in my space,
And how far away from you do you think he was when you first spotted him?
Oh, not even half a metre.
Oh, gosh, that's right in your space.
Yeah, right in my space. Yeah, so that really kind of freaked me out, yeah. And the weeks went on and I didn't see him again, and my daughter she hadn't seen him, I don't think, but she said there was something weird in her room. So maybe he'd been going into her room, I don't know. And it wasn't, that kind of went on for a while, and it was a little bit further down the track. This lady knocked on my front door and she said, look, I don't know you, sort of thing, but I'm a clairvoyant, and I just want to say to you that there's somebody, an Aboriginal girl, or there's somebody buried under your concrete slab in the shop. And I just thought, well, how bizarre that you would just knock on my door randomly. So that kind of cemented my idea, I suppose, that, yeah, this is just not me. This is other people are noticing it that are walking by, which was
I can't imagine what it would be like to have a stranger knock on your door and say something like that. That must have just been utterly extraordinary for you, Nell.
It really was. I said to her, well, do you know what happened to this person? Do you know where they are? And she said, no. I think she said, if there's something really bad has happened to this person. And that's kind of getting back to the history where I was trying to research what nation, like I knew the Worimi people lived here, but, what section of the Worimi, which I think were the Mayangal part of their group, the nation. And I thought, well, perhaps, because it was sand dunes, it's such an old area. I knew convicts had been lime burners on the peninsula. There were all kinds of things that were going on here in the early 1800s. I mean, there were people working from Newcastle. It was settled in 1804 when they tried with the convict settlement. So I thought, well, this could make sense. Perhaps somebody has killed this girl, and yeah, so that kind of really started to get me thinking. And then, of course, I was really switched on all the time after that. I thought, well, yeah, I've got to really start to keep an eye on things, because every little thing that happened then became a story, if you know what I mean. Like, it was like, why is this happening? Whereas before it was so easy to logically say, oh, that could have happened. The wind might have blown the keys on the back of the door, or the door, you just try to get logic into it. So what I started to do was I started to do automatic writing. I'd always been into that sort of thing. I used it on a couple of occasions to try and contact my great-grandmother. And I kind of got this voice that was coming through saying her name was Sylvia. Now, that's not an Aboriginal name or an Indigenous name, of course, but that's what I was getting. So I don't know if it was mixed messages, but, she was saying, yes, I'm buried here. And then you start to think, oh, is that me inventing that, or is this? But it was a very strong feeling, and I just kept writing. And then I was really convinced. I thought, yeah, there's just something. And it was always in the kitchen. Yeah, I just thought that's interesting that she's saying the front room. I'd seen this miner there, and there seemed to be this really concentration out there at the front room where this energy was. So, yeah, so that's kind of...
Yeah, I was just going to say that you did go on to get further confirmation about the Indigenous girl maybe more than one on your property, or
that's right.
Yeah, or having a connection to your property. And we'll go into that. But I'm just going to unpack a little bit more because I've gone through our original transcript. So I'm going to jog your memory about some points. And there was one really interesting thing that happened. And I believe that in terms of the chronology, it was early on.
Yep.
But I thought I'd bring it to your attention. It was when you had some friends staying over and they woke in the night because there was something very, very odd going on in your office. Tell us about that.
Yes, I had a very dear friend, two dear friends over, and my house has only got 2 bedrooms, so they're opposite our bedroom, having their stay over for the weekend. And they were woken in the night. I don't know if they were talking in bed but they must have still been awake. And the woman, I think she has a little bit of a bit psychic, but she definitely denies it. Anyway, they started hearing the typewriter, like the keyboard on my typewriter, on my computer was typing. And so my friend got up and he said, look, I can hear this typing. And he didn't want to turn the light on. I can't really remember if he saw the keys being pushed down. And so they were so freaked out. They woke us up and said, we can hear stuff. And we could all hear it. It was on and off. It went all kind of on and off through the night. You could just hear something typing. And I thought, well, that was the first time that actually objects were being manipulated in the space. And then I started to think, well, look, if other people can hear this is serious.
So where was your computer, Nell? In which room?
In the room I'm sitting in now. So my bedroom is just around the little hallway, just around the corner. So it's really easy to hear. And of course, in those days, it wasn't a laptop. I think, 12 or, a long time ago, we had the old, monitors and that. So I think the keyboards were actually louder. If you remember those little keyboards.
I do. They're very loud. Yes.
Yeah. So that was strange. And, ever since then, my girlfriend that comes and stays, she sleeps with me or she doesn't stay the night at all. She's totally freaked out.
Since that night.
She's terrified,
So that's amazing, Nell. And another thing that's quite interesting about that is that there was nothing you and your guests could do about it. It was going on, and so life had to go on. You 3 or 4 all had to just go back to sleep.
That's
right. You could while the typing was going on. And I've always found that juxtaposition of the two worlds colliding a very interesting space to dwell in. It's like, what is happening here? But yet, the tropes of your normal life, that all just has to continue.
That's right. And that's interesting you say that, because it is this space that, unless you've experienced it, it is like you're not asleep, you're awake, but you're kind of in another space that you can't really explain to somebody. And that you become very aware of that as all these things were going on. You're right. You go back to sleep and you think, what if I go back to sleep? What will happen? Will they come and get me? Or will they, so it's just bonkers, really. But it's the energy, I think, that I really noticed that, when this was going on, the air felt a bit electrified or electric, and cold. There were spots that were cold. So, that was pretty freaky.
I can relate to that air feeling electrified, though I've never seen an apparition as so many of my guests have described. I have felt exactly what you've just described, that sense of the air being electrified. And it's it's quite unsettling.
It is unsettling. Yeah. It is unsettling because it doesn't go with your normal, the way that you feel things, I guess. So it's not, you don't become struck with fear. It's just like it's like you're being pushed into a space that you can't see, and your whole body is reacting to that, if you know what I mean,
And so, Nell, I believe, and I think it came after the computer typing in the chronology, that you began to see orbs. Yes. And this, I think, was before seeing the miner. You actually saw orbs with your eyes, not...
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. So, yeah, you'd just be sitting down in a room, and it still happens to me now. I haven't seen the orbs for years and years, but you always get this feeling at the side of your eyes that there's something there, like a shadow or a little white wispy thing. And then if you turn to look, you just see these orange orbs. And once I researched, I could see them, a few of them, like lurking around my room at night. I'd see them. And I thought, well, look, I had very limited knowledge at that time, but I thought that can't be good. That means the energy has what is that? Is it a negative energy within this space? So I did a little bit of research, and then I realized that this could be a malicious spirit or some sort of thing that could turn into a poltergeist. And I'd never in my life considered that I'd be seeing a poltergeist, but that's what I believed it was. And many years later, I think since I have spoken to you, I did send you a few weeks ago, I had the Hunter Paranormal people had heard about my home after the book, and Rob Tilley came to see me and cleared the house. They were very interested, and I mean, this was after the clearing. They were very interested to come and camp out for the night. And they filmed these orbs. And so, that really, I saw them on camera, and it's like, well, it wasn't just me seeing them. They are still there. I think when there's a lot of stress or, upset in your life, I think they come back in a way. Like I've noticed in the last few weeks, there have been these wispy feelings again. I haven't seen the orbs. Not that I've been upset. I haven't been very well recently, but I think it's kind of an energy, that comes when they know the house, like when you've got a teenage daughter, there's a lot of angst.
Yes. And you mentioned poltergeist activity and your sense that the orbs might have been a precursor to that. And that was borne out by events. So I was about to ask you about that next, because I believe that the next thing that happened was the activity did begin to amp up quite significantly, and that did coincide with your daughter now being around the age of 14.
Yeah.
Common age for teenagers, within a home that there's poltergeist activity going on. Yeah. Very often there's a teenager of that age. It's very interesting. We don't know exactly what that's about, but as you suggested, it could well be that energy of angst and stress and perhaps even combined with some sort of dormant psychic mediumship.
I think so. Yeah.
You have those talents. So, and I know that your daughter has had her own experiences, and we might touch on that later. But so this happened, and you remarried, I think, Nell, and there was some tension, I think, with your.
Yes, there was.
And so then all this began to manifest within the home. And you said something quite interesting when we chatted. You said, and I believe it was at this point in the chronology, and I'm quoting you from our original interview. You said, whenever I closed my eyes, there would be these 4 old people, and I could never understand what they were saying, but they were just rabbiting on, and that was really weird.
Yes, it was.
And then they started to appear, you said. So it began sort of with an eyes closed sense of these 4 people, and then you called them the dead rellos, which And a lot of these instances weren't negative. You talked about them stroking your hair, and so this perhaps relates to that peaceful pocket that you mentioned. Yes. Tell us about this time, about first having that sense of them, and then when they began to appear.
Yeah, as you said, like I'd noticed these strong images when I closed my eyes at night, and I could see these old faces. And I could see them mouthing things, but they were talking to me, but I couldn't actually hear, like what they were saying. And then so I sort of started putting 2 and 2 together. And my daughter kept saying to me, Mum, there's something weird in my room. She wasn't at this point seeing anything. She was just getting really, really, really bad feelings in her room. I think it wasn't long after that I saw the old lady on the couch out in my back room. And this like 1940s lady just sitting there watching TV with me.
That's my favourite story. So I'm going to drag that one out of you in forensic detail. So we'll come back.
Yeah, but these images, I mean, things like you'd just be lying in bed and you would feel like, I don't know, footsteps or somebody touching the doona, and then you'd feel this stroking. And, I'd see these images first. And of course, my grandmother had passed and I was very close to her, and I thought, well, this is just Nan, and you know, but then it became a little bit intrusive. Like I would be feeling it. My husband felt it as well, someone walking on the bed. He claimed that someone tried to hold him down and strangle him. I wasn't here that night. I was with my parents, I think, because I would have certainly heard that commotion going on. But you did start to feel this presence, and this was starting to step over the line, if you know what I mean. It was like, you know, okay, I was fine having the feelings and smelling and seeing things. That, I mean, that was sort of, you know, pretty scary. But when things were like coming into your mind and then coming into your bedroom and touching you at night, that was just beyond, you know. I thought, well, now these orbs, are these the orbs? Are they malicious? Maybe they're not ancestors, they're not relatives being nice and, you know, showing themselves. This is kind of something that's quite, well, I don't believe in evil, but I think it was something that was malicious. I think that's probably the best words. Yeah, so I started to get quite frightened with that, because everybody, you know, you could feel breathing on the back of your neck sometimes if you're brushing your teeth in the bathroom. There was just this presence. There were presents everywhere, and not all. And I think the best way to describe it is that they weren't all the same. So some of them might have been malicious. Some of them might have been this wonderful, maybe relatives that were trying to get through and tell me something or reassure me. And then there was really the unknown, you know, were they going to be poltergeists?
Yes, so it was a combination of spirits. And then you mentioned Rob Tilley, who worked for the Parapsychological Association, yes. And he later confirmed that there was a whole host of spirits in your house, a lot of activity. Interestingly, there's also another story which we'll come back to that as well, but the instances of you being beginning to see the four people, the ones that you thought could be ancestors, that followed some really interesting research that you'd done into your family, Nell. And there's a wonderful story around that too.
Yes.
And I do want you to share that. But I think let's stay for a minute with the chronology of the apparition. So you mentioned the lady on the couch in the 1940s clothes. Take us back to that night and how you met her and what you saw and what happened.
Okay, well, I was actually home alone and I was just watching television, and I have like an armchair that I was sitting in, a little couch, and I sort of glanced over and I thought, oh, there's something there, and looked back again, and then there was this apparition. It was this gorgeous, probably 45, 50-year-old woman. She had kind of, you know, one of these exotic beehive-y type things on top of her head, and she was just sitting there watching TV with me. And I thought, my God, this can't be real. So I shut my eyes. I thought, no, she'll go away. I'm just seeing things. This will go away. And I looked back over and she was still there. And I just turned to her and said, well, I hope you're enjoying the show. And I said something like that because I was just like, what? And, you know, she just was there and then she was gone again. So I'd say 2 really good sightings of her there within the space of 5 minutes. And I sort of started to think, it's interesting you said about the 4 people that I kept seeing, and I thought, yeah, maybe she's one of them. Yeah, I just felt this cold spot and then she was gone. So, but I have never seen anything so clear. She had lovely shoes. She just looked straight out as she walked off the catwalk in the Women's Weekly, you know, 1950s fashion pages. That's what she looked like to me, you know.
Oh, amazing. And what was her dress like?
Oh, it had like blue and yellow, kind of like, you know, those like big flowers. I think it was white or blue, and it had all these beautiful coloured flowers all over it. At the waist, you know, lovely hugging, the pointy boobs, this gorgeous hairdo, you know, and she was very dark. She was very dark. And I mean, now when I think it's not anybody that I know. When I saw her, I really thought, wow, I'm imagining you, or I'm not imagining. I wasn't sure, and then I thought, but I don't know you. I had this instinctive feeling that there was no connection between myself and her. I did feel that.
When you say she was dark, do you mean dark-skinned?
No, she was just I thought she looked quite Mediterranean, like, you know, maybe Italian, very dark brunette. You know, no, she didn't look, she wasn't Indigenous, but she just looked Mediterranean to me, or Spanish almost, you know.
How fascinating. So do you feel that she was attached to the home?
I think she was attached to the home, definitely. I think she might have been around the 30s or 40s. Maybe she was a shop assistant. You know, Mrs. Fairless had a couple of shop assistants. Perhaps she came from there. She could have been a visitor. I mean, this space might have some meaning to her that we don't know about. And, you know, perhaps she's come back here because she feels, you know, I had another funny incident, which I didn't tell you the other day when I wrote to you, but Mrs. Fairless, who ran the shop, she had a son called Charles Fairless, and he went to the First World War. He became a captain and he was killed. He was only a young man, probably in his early 30s. And that was something that I started to research, you know, when I was doing the house. And I thought, oh, I'll follow this up further. So I found a descendant in Stockton. He was his great nephew. And on the front of my house, there is a war memorial that Mrs. Fairless put up there for her son. It's got 2 suns, 2 palm trees, and the Menin Gate that the Australian soldiers used to walk through to go into the battlefield, I guess on the Somme, Passchendaele, those places. So I had a chat to him, and he was kind enough to give me a photograph of this fellow. And he said to me, would you put it in a frame and put it in your home, because your home is, you know, that's well documented in Stockton. Everyone knows and she built the war memorial as well. She was a secretary, which is at the end of the street. Anyway, this fellow, in a joke, said to me, I've had insomnia for 15 years and I'm really happy that, you know, I can give you this photo. And that was just in the conversation, you know, where I just sort of, oh, I don't sleep well and this sort of thing. Anyway, I put the photo up in my front room and put it in a frame. I've got 2 photos of him now. And this fellow came back and saw me about 2 weeks later. And he said, the day that I gave you that photo, I've never had a night since then that I haven't slept through the night. I don't have insomnia anymore. And I thought, wow, you know, going back to the girl on the couch, that perhaps all these people that were here, that there was some meaning here. Well, of course, this was his home before he went to the war. So maybe he was lurking. He said, oh, I got this incredible feeling when I walked down the side of your house that his spirit, because we made that gesture, you know, maybe he's released. I don't know. It was just weird. Like that was, and this guy's like 65, 70. He just looked like an average Aussie guy who, you know, you wouldn't think would believe in spirits or ghosts or anything. But that was a really amazing comment for him, I thought.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these little connections can really be so significant in our lives. Like that gentleman said, the great nephew of the man who died in the war. How odd that he would feel that after years of insomnia, giving you that photo and closing the loop in some way has now helped him to sleep.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating because whatever truly is the mechanism behind that, the fact remains he can now sleep.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe that the spirit of that boy Charles, you know, maybe he wanted somebody to do something to acknowledge, because you know, this house, when I bought it, it'd probably been vacant for, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years, even though there was an attempt to make a little shop again. But maybe he felt that he had to come, but there had to be something to signify. Maybe he felt that, you know, the war memorial had no more meaning now 100 years, and people didn't know that was him, and that he wanted to come back to this space or be released from this space. I'm not sure, but
yeah, I'm not sure either of how it works, but I've often had the sense doing these interviews as well that the whole point is just that we remember each other. That we remember each other and the part that we played in this huge tapestry of life, that we just remember each other, and that gives us respite.
I think so. You know, I mean, I'm not particularly religious, but I think these kinds of experience are almost religious, because what you're saying is, I think that there is, I mean, I do believe very strongly in spirits, not just because I've seen spirits or seen ghosts, but I have this very spiritual connection. I think nature's very spiritual, and, you know, we just, as modern people, we're not listening. We don't listen to clues that are in our space that there is, which I think Indigenous people have, because there wasn't all this light pollution, noise pollution. And so I think that's a pretty relevant point around that idea.
I really like it. And you're right about us not listening. And there's so much around us and within us to indicate that there's much more, although it's unseen for most of us. Nell, it's unseen, but there are some of us who say and there's so much we can learn from the Indigenous cultures as well, just in terms of that listening and that connection to nature. That's a beautiful little side story there. Thanks for sharing that, Nell.
Pleasure.
Okay, so now we're around the time that Caitlin is around 14, 15, and, as we said, notoriously powerful age for some poltergeist activity to manifest in certain circumstances. So, and some things began to happen that were really unsettling. And I'm just looking at my notes here. So there were things like items going missing, like big items going missing, small items going missing, and some clothing that very disturbingly was found shredded and in the bin, and she was not the culprit.
It's pretty bizarre.
What happened?
Well, as you said, my daughter was, and my marriage was a bit rocky at the time. My husband was Greek, very dramatic man, very spiritual, but I think for teenagers, new partner, there was that tension. And we started to notice, first of all, little things in the kitchen would go missing, a set of keys, a cup, a glass. They wouldn't turn up again. But then really big items. My daughter in her room put her iPod onto charge, and it was near the window. She went to sleep. I said goodnight to her. That was there. By the morning it had gone. We just don't know where it went. And of course, we thought, teenagers, she sold it. She wants to get some money for it or whatever. She swore black and blue that's not what happened. And I did believe her. Money was missing. Things that you'd put down would turn up in a completely different room, and then you'd have to sort of self-check yourself. Well, we all walk into a room and say, what am I in here for? Or I thought I put that on the kitchen table, but no, it was on the back, like in just the weirdest spots. And then 8 of my husband's business shirts, he was going down to Sydney. He was working for 3 days, and he said, oh, Nella, we'll have to put a load of washing on us. I've got no shirts. And then he went into the thing, and I said, well, they're not in the wash. And there was half his wardrobe wasn't there. And I said, well, this is very strange. And I don't know why it must have been bin day. And we looked in the bin, and 8 or 9 of these business shirts were just ripped up, sliced up, and in the bin. And of course he thought, this is the teenage. But no, but then it just, CDs went. What else went? Oh, look, just little trinkets around, little cups, little china things, and they were never to be seen again. And so that, I think, really, that would have been about August of the year, and that really was the end for me. I thought, this is now becoming really worrisome, and what am I going to do about it? And I kind of contacted a clairvoyant, and I was very unsure about the legitimacy of some people. So I never gave up too much information. And one woman did come, and she reckoned she could see the miner, or she could smell the miner, but there wasn't enough. I didn't think she was reading the situation. And so we sort of spent an hour together, and she went. So then I started to Google, who can I speak to? And that's how I found, through the parapsychology through the Sydney Uni, or I found Rob Tilley. And I thought, I have to do something. So we invited him to come. Must have been he was able to come up and see us on the last day of term of that year. And then we were going on holidays. And my husband wasn't here, but my daughter was. And we went through the whole process with him with clearing the house, because, seeing ghosts or apparitions or a spirit and hearing some things moving around, that's kind of not so bad. But when you're having items taken that is actually interfering in the family, and it's causing angst and anxiety in between people, I knew that really I had to do something. And I really wasn't even sure whether he'd be able to do anything. It's all on the hop, because I felt that I've always felt that I've got this sixth sense, or I've got this, I can hear and see things that other people can't. But, to find somebody that was really skilled, I certainly didn't have the skills to do anything about it. So that's really why I got Rob in, because I was just becoming scared, and my daughter was becoming scared. We sort of said, well, we won't speak about it, because we thought if we spoke about it, there are these ghosts, I think, some of them that want to get your attention. Some of them are trying to make you, I think the strokes on the bed is all about, I'm a relative, I want you to, feel good, that don't be sad that I've gone, I'm here, even though you've got no way of identifying who that person is. But this was on another whole level.
There was a combination of things in your home, and Rob did go on to say that. I've got stories of other stories of houses that Rob has cleared in where spirits dwell. So I haven't actually contacted him for years. I don't know if he still does this, but at that
he does.
He does. Okay.
Yeah.
He clears homes. He knows how to do it. So he's a person with mediumship skills, yet he is very scientific in his orientation as well, which is very helpful. So it's very balanced. Interesting combo there.
Yeah, but that's why I liked him, because he's so balanced. Yeah.
So what did he say when he walked in? And I made reference to it before, but tell us about what he said, and also when he got to the backyard.
Okay, well, when he first arrived, I invited him in, and I did have my grandmother clock in the front room, and that's a sort of an important part of the story. But he came in and he said, oh my goodness, the place is packed with ghosts. I went, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean there's like 4 or 5? He goes, no, there's 40, there could be 50 here. And I thought, oh, this can't be happening. And he went into my daughter's room and he said there's some very malicious souls in there. There was 3, and there was a few, the minor guy. There was some old guy that he saw that was bent over, that who resisted on moving on. He was between the shop and the house. So he said, look, there were a whole lot of people in here. Then he went out to the backyard, and my yard's it's fairly long, and I have got a native garden, and he went right out to the back, and he got to the shed. He said, I can't go any further. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I can't intrude. He said that this is too powerful here. This is something indigenous, and then I said, oh my goodness, like this must be this Aboriginal or Indigenous girl that was referenced to me before. And so he said, I can't come and clear that. He had to talk to his son, who I think is also involved, but I think his son had studied Indigenous.
Yes, there was a connection there that his son had studied it, as you said, and had connections with the elders of the area.
That's right.
I think Rob went on to consult with those elders in terms of next steps for that.
So what he advised me to do about, I'll just call her Sylvia, but what he advised me to do about her was go into the space, and he said, you've got all these beautiful, like I've got some Sydney rock orchids right where he was, saying that this feeling was. And he said, what you do is you sort of apologize and talk to the person and make it really nice. And so that's what I did for quite a while. I'd say, look, I've planted these beautiful trees. They're for you. They're native. I'm trying to recreate, make a lovely space for you. So that's what happened there. And then when we came back into the house, like he did the whole, we had to sit with my daughter and imagine that, the house was covered and made it safe with, beautiful white light. And there was a whole process. And then he spent about 6 hours going around and telling these ones to go to the light. And some of them really didn't want to go. So it took quite a long time. And then he noticed my grandmother clock. And I had that next to the fridge in the front room. And he said to me, I believe that that's a meridian, that you are on some sort of spiritual, maybe Indigenous, but you're on a meridian, and that maybe that's a portal. So I immediately moved that. He spent all this time clearing, and then he said there was 2 people that would still be here. They wouldn't move on, but they weren't malicious, and they were women. And he said they had a very strong presence. They had a very strong relationship to this house. He said, look, I can't guarantee, but he said, they're not going to hurt you. They're just here. And of course, I told him about the 50s or 40s woman. I don't know if it was her, but they are still here. I can feel them still, but they're not doing anything lately that's really terrible. So that was great. That was the last day of school, and my daughter and I were going up to join my husband up at Tamworth with his family. We were going up for Christmas and for 2 weeks. And when we got home, there were these 5 sticks outside the shop door on the footpath, and you can understand it's a big wide footpath and kids play under the awning, and their parents are in the pub, and these little sticks were 1, 2, they were like this, getting smaller. And I said to my husband, well, that's a bit weird, but maybe some kids have been playing here. But when we got inside, there was the same 5 sticks on the other side of the door. And so I immediately rang Rob, terrified that, my God, what are they doing now? And he said, look, one of them followed me home in the car, which I thought was classic. And he said, look, because he's got such strong abilities that he can feel it even on a phone call that you're making from city to city. He can feel that. He's incredible. And he said, no, he believed that was the indigenous spirits, that they were saying, hey, that's okay. Your house is good now, and we thank you, and, you're safe, and all will be well. But that was probably the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. I mean, I could not believe that when I saw it. Completely flummoxed.
Astonishing. So what I'm picturing is that it was almost like a mirror image on either side of the door, the same formation of sticks. 5 sticks. I don't know if you've got a photo of that.
No, I don't have a photo.
Okay.
I don't know why I didn't take a photo. I should have actually.
Yeah, it's normal in these moments, though. Yeah, I've spoken to so many people. They go, "Oh, it just happened," and then like you're so present in that moment.
Yeah. And the thing is, I did feel. I took the sticks and I put them into the garden at the back. What did go through my mind is maybe I could keep these sticks because they might actually have some sort of power or energy around them. But I thought, no, don't muck around with this. So I just took them and put them in the backyard. I mean, they would have disintegrated by now. But when you're in that moment, it's very difficult to, you're just so focused on what's occurred rather than, I've got to record this. I mean, now, like after sort of 2010 and the advent of all social media is much more prolific, I think you're more you're aware, and I had those people that came and filmed things. But in those days, it was just like, oh my God, I've got to get these sticks out. And I don't know if my daughter saw them. She knows the story, definitely. But, I didn't really want to traumatize her any further. That was a huge experience for her to go through, to sit with Rob and for her to go through the whole process. I think it made her realize how strong her abilities are. I think for all of us that have these abilities, I think people just poo-poo them when you're younger. You don't develop them because this goes back to that listening thing. I know I can hear things. Like I've heard like 1950s and 40s radios playing in this house. It's a quiet day and you just think, oh yeah, someone's got the radio. And then my husband said, yeah, I can hear that. That sounds like, 2KY back in the day.
Extraordinary.
So those, I think she became scared of it. So I didn't really want to pursue that with her. And even to this day, she says she stayed over with me on the weekend, and she's lived with me, her and her husband, for a couple of years. And, my son-in-law has had experience, but she wasn't so scared because I feel that perhaps she had her husband with her, when they came back. But I think she kind of squashed it. I think she's probably more powerful than me if she really put her mind to it,
Oh, well, it seems like she was really perhaps even the engine of the experiences.
Yeah, I think so, because Rob was in her room for ages and she felt that there was somebody in her wardrobe, or there was someone in her wardrobe. There was somebody that was taking things. And of course, getting back to the taking of things, that was just, you sort of think, well, okay, they've taken it, but where did they take it? And sort of, Rob was conveying these stories to me that, sometimes they get confused. They think that they're still living and they can hide it somewhere. It goes into the ether and, and they might bring them back. And he did say to me after he cleared the house, you might find some of those things back. And I did get some things back, just little cups, a couple of funny forks or, but we never got our money back. We never got the iPad back. I think her phone something happened to her phone. So obviously, I think I came into the space and maybe they didn't like it either, that we were here. You know, maybe they sort of were like, oh, hang on, this is our place to dwell. And perhaps they thought that it was, excuse me, the 1940s when they were living here, you know, that kind of thing. So you're in my space. How can I get you out? Yeah.
Anything's possible. But what I did want to ask about, just in terms of going back to the Aboriginal girl, Sylvia. So I know that you saw her, Nell, at one point, but also your sister-in-law when she came today, which is, again, one of the most fascinating aspects of your story, is how widespread the activity was and how many different characters came and had experience. So tell us about what happened that day.
Okay, so I think it might have been Easter, and my brother and he's got 3 kids. We all took the kids, my brother and I, because my sister-in-law was studying. So we said, look, we'll take the kids for a walk on the beach. You go in the front room and, you know, use your computer. So it started off in there for her that weekend. She felt this breathing and this smell down her neck, you know. And then, you know, she told me when she came in, oh, there's something in your kitchen, like I've had something breathing down my neck. She's also a person who had experiences when she was a child. So I think she had a very strong psychic ability. And then over the course of the weekend, I've got a little garden where the garden is out the back, little table. And she was sitting out there doing something. We were all getting, and it was dark. And she said she saw in the distance in the garden these 3 little girls playing, and she thought they were Indigenous. And she said they looked like they had little dresses on when children were taken away from their parents, trying to assimilate them in the 1800s.
And Sylvia could have been an assimilated name.
Yeah. And, you know, and then so you do ask yourself, well, is this, she might have seen something and is she putting 2 and 2 together? And she gave quite a good description. She said they were just sort of playing and they zoomed in and out of the bushes. And then the next day I saw them and I thought, oh, my God, they're going to come up and I wanted them. I wasn't scared of them. I wanted them to come up. But they were just there doing their thing. They just were playing. They didn't really, you couldn't hear them speaking or anything. But
how far were they from you?
Oh, not very far, 2 or 3 meters.
I remember you telling me in our original interview way back when that that the girls, they were, again, just like your sister-in-law saw, they were wearing the white dresses, that sense of, you know, that tragic assimilation. And also that there was a sense that there was some neglect, that they were a little bit, you know, I remember you saying you even saw the detail of runny noses on
the runny noses, and their hair looked kind of matted, you know, that sort of at the back it looked all a bit matted as though they'd slept on it or they hadn't washed, or they looked like little orphans that, you know, had been swept away from their parents and would have been a lot better off living with their own people. And that's kind of and they didn't have shoes on. And it was that kind of really Victorian looking white, you know, that sort of, that was just, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, you know. But they weren't scary, you know, they probably did see us, but they weren't trying to scare us. They were just on their plane. Again, getting back to this thing, I think this area has just got that, you know, there are people that are mixed up here that they think they're still living their life in the 1800s or the 1850s or the 1940s. It seems to be that kind of space where people are on a plane that they still think that they exist because they haven't gone to the light.
So you didn't get a sense that the girls were interacting with you at all? It was like you were getting a glimpse of a moment in time.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's how that really, and that's sort of what my sister-in-law said. She said it was like you were just an observer looking in. They weren't really aware of us. I mean, they must have seen us or seen her or seen me the day later, but they weren't involved in, they weren't coming up to spook me or like these other experiences where you felt like they were trying to infringe on your space. So that's another entirely, it was like, that's a good description. It was like a moment in history. Somebody just took the lid off and said, yeah, you can see what's going on here 100 years ago.
So then you went on to discover something about a house that might be yours that was described in a book called The Ghost Guide to Australia. Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. There were a couple of things in there that were describing people seeing ghosts in Stockton. And there was one where I think the story went that the little baby sat up in bed. And in the same street, there was a woman was murdered in one of the shops. She had a boarding house, and I think she was murdered. And so there was always these rumors that, you know, there were ghosts in that house. Initially, I thought when they described this house, they didn't say what the address was. I thought, oh my God, this is my house. This has to be my house that they're talking about. I must actually go and get that book out again, you know, because, gosh, that's like probably 15 years ago that I looked at it. But I became increasingly aware. I mean, you know, Stockton's the second oldest suburb in Australia. People came into, you know, Shortland came into Newcastle in 1797. You know, they had a failed attempt at a settlement to colonise, I should say, in 1801 and 1804. And so, you know, they were coming over to Stockton, getting cedar, getting lime. And so, you know, I worked at the local school and I started talking to people saying, oh, you know, these are all these experiences. Is Stockton very haunted? Are they rather? And then all of a sudden it was like all these people that I knew said, oh, yeah, my house is haunted, you know. And then recently, actually, it's funny you say that because my niece, she's interested in ghosts. She's another one who won't stay the night. She won't even stay the night with me. She's so scared. But she said one of her colleagues wanted to know about my story and would I send her what, you know, the story that we did all those years ago. So I sent, and he apparently had found another story in Stockton where, you know, that these people had rented a place. It was so haunted. Their children actually, one of their children was taken from their bed or something and they found it in a cupboard under the stairs. Like this sort of thing, you know. So I think there's definitely something on this peninsula because there's just too many stories. Like another friend I was having coffee with yesterday, he's a builder. He restores beautiful old homes. He's been restoring a funeral where they used to have the funeral parlour for people to view bodies. The actual mortuary was across the road. He's restored this house and he said, I was alone in the house a few weeks ago and I was up the ladder and I nearly fell and someone started pulling my leg. And, you know, he's just a guy. He's a skeptic. Now that it's kind of out in the open, people come up to me all the time and say, oh, yeah, I had this experience. And so there's something here, Karina. There is something here on this.
Clearly, Nell. It's yeah. Well, I think the history, you know, is something very. It plays a key role, and you know, there's a theory that places like battlefields or old hospitals or those kinds of places are very loaded because you know there was a lot of emotion that might have been attached to the moment of passing, and that those things are recorded forevermore. There's a theory that says every moment, every thought, everything is recorded forevermore anyway.
Yeah. I believe that. I really do. You know, I mean, I've always been suspicious that perhaps here on this street particularly had a lot of sand dunes. And of course, we know that Worimi people, they didn't bury, you know, they put them in the sand dunes when people passed. And, you know, the wind would blow because we've got the biggest sand moving mass in the Southern Hemisphere. That's our beach. But I've always been really aware that there could have been some sort of killings or something here. There's some parts of my garden that just feel so, there's just something not right about it. There's some sort of feeling here that something nasty happened, and I think it did involve Indigenous people, which wouldn't be unusual. I mean, the settlement, which was called Kingstown then, was very brutal. So you just don't know, do you?
Don't know. And the history, very sadly, of the tragedy, the brutality of the encounters between the settlers and the Indigenous people, it's steeped in blood, and it is awful. And we probably only know the tiniest little tip of the iceberg. So you think that it's possible, and you had Rob, you know, consult the elders as to what to do, and you did the beautiful ceremony. And, you know, it's so interesting that woman turned up out of the blue and knocked on your door and said the same thing.
I know. That felt more legitimate, made things feel a bit more legitimate for me. One of my feelings in the school where I worked, we had two very lovely Indigenous workers that worked with us. And I've been to Worimi country through school. We stayed up there for 3 days and did activities and so on. And I have spoken to some of the elders about my property. I am trying to organise for them to come down, because I would like them to come down and maybe do a ceremony and that's meaningful to them. Perhaps they have knowledge when they come here that they will be able to say to me, yeah, you know, there are bad spirits here, or there is something that's not right, and let's make it right. That can't happen overnight. It's a lot of consultation. But my friends at school said, yeah, do it, because they would be very interested to come down, and this is their land anyway, you know. So,
oh, I think that's beautiful that you've begun that process of healing for everybody involved, the girls, you know, their descendants, their ancestors, everybody. That's really
important to me, because I think it, you know, with all the experiences I have had here, I don't want to be reactionary. I think I've got, like, inviting Rob was great, because he obviously was able to send some people, whatever reason they were here, he was able to send them on and give them peace, and they've gone to the light. And that's really what you want, I think. There are elements here. I mean, still at night, if I'm watching TV, I can hear people walking, I can hear creaks, and it's the same creak, and it's like someone is just standing next to my chair. You know, they're obviously not at peace. Or they could be two ladies, or the spirits that Rob said were here, they might just be joining in. But it's unnerving. I've accepted it, and I don't worry too much about that. But yeah, my thing is about healing and making the space safe again, or saying, yeah, you can stay here, this is a safe space, but, you know, please don't cut up my shirts. Yeah, so that's where it's religious in a sense, or it's a spiritual experience, because you can't just ignore the energy. You can't ignore what is here. And if I can make that energy calm, well, that only can benefit everybody.
That's lovely, Nell. I really appreciate those reflections. And as we approach the end of our conversation now, I just do want to hark back to one thing that I mentioned early on. So just about our ancestors' roles in our lives. And so, you know, ancestors play a massive part in your story, the Indigenous ancestors as well as your own ancestors, I think. And I'd like to explore that idea of the ancestral ties with the spirits you saw. So there was a story about that happened years before you actually moved into your home, and it was when your daughter was only about 8 years old, but you had a very strange experience in a hairdresser. And tell us about what happened.
Okay, well, I was living in Surrey Hills, and I went to an unknown hairdresser that I'd never been to before. Walked in, said, look, you know, I just want a haircut. And I could see straight away that she clocked me, and she said, oh, you know, sit down. And she said, you know, you've been looking for somebody. You're looking for something. I'm getting a very strong feeling. And she said, would you mind taking your shoe off? And I thought, my goodness, what's this? And I had been researching my great-grandmother, who I know her whole story now, but in those days I was really, her name was Nell Jones. I was searching for, you know, my grandfather was born without a dad. No one knew who his dad was. Not born without a dad, but you know what I mean. And so there was this, I must have been carrying this incredible amount of information that I was strongly looking for my great-grandmother and her life story and trying to find out what happened to her. And she just started rubbing my foot, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just go with this. And she said, look, you don't need to look any further. You are who the person you are looking for. All the answers are contained within you. You know the answers, and you can stop looking for Ethel. And I went, oh my God, like, how did she even know this name? And it was really strange. And when she said that, I thought, why did she get me to take off my shoe? Now, I later found out that Ethel's, my great-grandfather, Thomas Jones, was a shoemaker. He was a bootmaker. And so she must have had this strong connection that, you know, my great-grandmother had grown up with a shoemaker. There was some weird thing there anyway. But what she told me to do, which was the strange, she said, now, look, if you're trying to find the answers, I was trying to find who my grandfather's father was. She said, go home, light a candle and ask 3 questions, and then through the night, those questions will be answered. Whatever the burning questions you have about, you know, who's the identity or of your grandfather's father, it'll come to you in the night. So we all go off to bed. I didn't tell my daughter, of course, and she was too little. So I lit in the kitchen sink, I lit this candle for safety so it could burn down. And then in the middle of the night, my daughter came and, you know, woke me up and said, "Mum, I went to get a drink of water. There's an old lady sitting in the lounge room. She looks like someone out of one of your photo albums, Mum." Because I've been a family historian, probably interested since I was 12, which is probably when I discovered that I had some psychic ability, I guess. This poor girl spent all her school holidays in the state library or in cemeteries, so she kind of knew. Anyway, I went out there and had a look. I had a feeling, but I couldn't see anything. So I, toddled her off to bed, and don't worry. And it's just a nice experience, Caitlin. This is just, if it was an old lady, she's just an old lady, and don't worry about her. She's not going to hurt you. Got her off to sleep. And then I said to her in the morning, "Are you prepared to talk about this?" And we got the album, and she pointed to Ethel. She said, "That's who it was. This was Ethel." And then from that day on, we started getting stomping on the roof. We had a possum there, but it wasn't that. It was like someone was walking on the roof. And I think that's when it all started for me. And Rob he knew that story, and he said, "No, she followed you. She followed you up to your place." Maybe that's what started it. Maybe because I brought her, that meant for the others that maybe they knew that I could see them or I could hear them. So that was just, for somebody so randomly to just out of the blue. I did not know this woman from a bar of soap. I wouldn't even recognize her if I saw her again. It was just this totally weirdest experience.
And you were going to the hairdresser to get your hair done, and out of the blue, this woman. Yeah. And it seems like it's really interesting, the connection with the shoemaking, and maybe she was sort of channeling in a way. And
I think she must have been.
Very interesting. The things that happened to you, Nell.
I know, it's weird. It's weird.
I might take on that tip, actually, because I've started researching my Spanish ancestors' stories as inspiration for my novel. I'm dreaming up at the moment, Nell.
Great.
Maybe I'll use that trick and see what happens. Be careful what you wish for.
Do be careful what you wish for. And I think I sent you a photo, probably that was 5 or 6 years ago. So where my bookcase out the front, I heard that big bang, and then all these books had been sideswiped onto the floor. That's been the only really, since Rob cleared the place, that's been the only really negative. That just was unexplained. I could not explain that. That
photo is very strange, and with your permission, I will share it as
sure.
I publicise this. And I've got the date on that photo that you sent me. So that was in 2013.
13, yeah.
2013. But there was one, before we sign off, as recently as 2019, your niece's partner had a really profound experience.
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
Well, it was Christmas, and they were sleeping in my front room. We had bodies everywhere. And so they were asleep in the couch. They were sleeping on 2 big leather couches in the front room. And Izzy woke up, and he could feel this really strong presence in the room. And then when he looked a bit harder, he said he saw an Indigenous person standing near the fridge, and he was coming over towards him and almost leaning over him and hovering, and he freaked out. He's another one. See, that's my niece Saskia. They won't stay here now. And he said he is just a guy who, he's French actually, but he's not a person who I would say would have ever thought about ghosts, or he was so adamant. But the fact that he came over to him so he thought he was going to touch him. He was freaking out. So he woke up my niece, and they couldn't see, he'd gone. He couldn't see anything. And I haven't seen that person. So obviously he's got some abilities there, or somebody was trying to tell him something. I always believe that there's a reason that, they're showing you themselves. They're trying to tell you something, either to get a message or, just to let you know that they're there. They both are too scared to stay here. So maybe it might even be worthwhile asking Rob again. Maybe some new ones have come to live here. I don't know.
Well, what's clear from talking to you is that it's sacred ground there, Nell.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it is, that sense of a portal is quite apparent as well. And you're doing, I feel like you're doing a lovely job of stewarding the place or the portal, your home for so long. So when you look back today on that very active period of your life, How do you reconcile it? What are your reflections?
I think when it was at the height of the activity, I think there was a lot of stress and angst, within our family that was also exacerbated by all the activity. And I always wonder, like, why did this happen to me? Like, why, because I had some experiences when I was a smaller child. I've always heard things and seen things and never spoke to anyone about it, and just, so perhaps it was just a crescendo, and I just happened to walk into this space that was, I think there are many dimensions here. I think scientists, say there's sort of 6 dimensions, but, I think they've found that really there are far more than that. And I think that this being this house, everything came at once. It freaks me out sometimes, but I think it also gave me the courage in a way to accept that perhaps I have got some abilities that, that are there that I should further develop. And I do feel like, because I'm a retired teacher now, but, I do feel that there are things that I get feelings of things. It's kind of helped me, with the way I write, with the way I look at the world. And I think you can watch shows on TV and say, oh, ghosts exist and all this. But when you've gone through something like that, you do look at yourself and think, why did this happen to me? There's got to be a reason. I've obviously got something here that I've got to develop, or there's something that I need to, somehow someone's put me here because I've got to realize that there's something, I've got to change something in my life, or do something. I don't know. It's like a big message, So, I mean, I really wouldn't like to go through that again. That was just too, but I mean, there's things here. I can feel them, they probably know I'm talking about them now, because I'm getting a little bit of a cold feeling sitting here. But I mean, so I think it's special. I think I try on a personal level. Yeah, it kind of made me examine myself and say, maybe you do have these skills, and what's wrong with it? Because I think you hide it. You don't tell people because they think you're nuts. First, people say, oh, you've got ghosts. Yeah, ha, ha. I don't believe in ghosts and all this. But maybe it's just a spiritual experience that was meant to happen to me. And maybe it's given me things in my life that if I hadn't had those experiences, maybe my life wouldn't have taken the same way, And because I'm so interested in history, it was kind of like a culmination of a whole lot of things,
Yes.
that brought me here. I don't know.
I think that's a really beautiful reflection to end on, that there's something there for you to discover, that it is something that is natural, that's a part of you, that is asking to be attended to.
Yes.
And just like spirits of all of the people that you saw and that are on the grounds, they want to be attended to. And so we'll dedicate this episode, I think, to Sylvia and her friends.
Thank you.
And yes, and we what a joy to speak with you today, Nell, to have our little reunion. Thank you so much for coming.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you. It was very interesting to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Sisters. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review the show. Have an experience you'd like to share with me? Get in touch at my website, karinamachado.com, or find me on Facebook at Karina Machado Author. After all, there's nothing more powerful than a story.